Mafia boss found a female cop wounded and bleeding. What happened next shocked the entire police force. Rain hit the bricks like gunfire when Salvatore Maranzano saw her. A cop, bleeding out against the wall, whispering the name of the man who betrayed them both. He should have walked away. But when he ripped open her vest and saw who she really was chasing, the city's most feared mafia boss made a choice that would burn the entire police force to the ground. Before we begin, please take a moment to support this channel by clicking the like, share, and subscribe button so you can keep enjoying awesome stories like this. Thank you. He wasn't supposed to be there. Men like him didn't drive alone. Men like him didn't stop for anyone. But he stopped. Something caught the light. A badge, half buried in a puddle beside the brick wall. He stepped out, the rain soaking his tailored shirt, and followed the glint until he saw her. A police officer, slumped against the wall. Her face pale, her uniform soaked in blood, her radio hissing weakly between bursts of static. Her lips moved, a whisper, barely there. They tried to finish me. For a moment, he almost walked away. The code that built his empire was clear. Never involve yourself in police business, especially not when there's blood on the ground. But something older than his code, something buried deep beneath the tattoos and the sins, made him kneel. He pressed his hands against her wound, felt her pulse fading under his palms. "Stay with me," he muttered, voice low, commanding. "You don't get to die in my street." A siren wailed far off. He checked his phone. No signal. The line was dead, the air too thick with storm and interference. Somewhere above them, thunder rolled like judgment. When the red and blue lights turned the corner, they found only the blood, the badge, and the rain. The officer was gone. So was the man who took her. Hours later, in a penthouse above a hidden speakeasy, Maranzano sat in silence beside her unconscious form. He hadn't patched a wound since the war in Sicily, but the hands remembered. And as he watched the life flicker back into the eyes of a woman sworn to arrest him, he realized this night had already changed everything. When Jeanette woke, the world felt upside down. The last thing she remembered was rain, cold, endless rain, and a face she didn't recognize leaning over her, eyes carved from shadow and regret. Now she was staring at a chandelier. Crystal light refracted above her like 1,000 silent raindrops. Her body ached, ribs bandaged tight, and the sharp scent of antiseptic mixed with cigar smoke hung in the air. Expensive sheets. Silk. Not hospital white, ivory. She shifted, pain flaring through her side. A voice came from the dark. "Don't move. The stitches will tear." Her heart jumped. She turned her head and saw him. Salvatore Maranzano. The ghost. The name every cop whispered, but no one had ever seen. He sat in a leather chair near the bed, sleeves rolled to the elbow, tattoos curling up his forearms like stories written in another life. A small lamp burned beside him. The light hit his eyes, and she saw something she didn't expect. Exhaustion, maybe. Or something older. He was holding a needle and thread. Not for a suit. For her. Jeanette's voice cracked, dry as dust. Where am I?" "Safe," he said simply. "You kidnapped me." He didn't look offended. "If I wanted you dead, officer, I would have left you in the alley." That shut her up. She glanced down. Her vest and uniform were gone, replaced by a clean shirt, oversized on her frame. Bandages wrapped her torso. The wound no longer burned, just throbbed dully with every breath. "You stitched me up. I've done worse work," he said. "But you'll live." She tried to sit up. "Why? Why help me?" He met her stare and said nothing. Only after a long pause. "I don't like debts." The words hung in the air like smoke. Below them, faint through the walls, came the muffled hum of jazz, a saxophone, soft laughter, clinking glasses. She realized they were above something. He followed her gaze. Speakeasy. Private. Only friends downstairs. She swallowed. Friends or criminals? A corner of his mouth twitched. Depends on who's asking. He rose, setting the needle aside. His movements were deliberate, disciplined. Not the swagger of a crime boss, something cleaner. She'd seen that kind of precision before, in the field, watching paramedics work to keep a dying officer alive. "You're good at this," she said quietly. His brow lifted. "At what?" "Not killing you. At saving people." He stared at her for a long time. Then, once. A long time ago. Before what? He looked away. "Before I learned that saving lives doesn't stop the bleeding, it only delays it." She frowned. That's not in your file. Now he did smile, but it wasn't warm. You've read about me. Everyone in the department has. And what does the department say? That you're a ghost. That you built half this city with fear and bullets. And you believe everything you read, Officer McDonald? Her eyes widened slightly. You know my name? He tapped his temple. You had a badge. You talk in your sleep. The air between them tightened. Jeanette tried to piece together her memory. The ambush, the unmarked cars, the shots, the blood. Someone in her own department had set her up. But now she was lying in silk sheets in the house of the man she was trained to bring down. Her voice softened. If this is protection, why does it feel like captivity? Maranzano didn't answer. He picked up a glass of water from the side table and handed it to her. His hand was steady, veins taut beneath the ink. When their fingers brushed, she felt the faint tremor of someone who'd known too much violence and too little peace. She drank, the coolness cutting through her dry throat. You don't seem like the stories. He leaned against the edge of the desk. Stories are what people tell themselves to sleep at night. Truth is what keeps them awake. He said it so casually, but it hit her like a confession. She studied him in the dim light. The scars near his collarbone, the faded tattoo of a serpent on his wrist, the old photograph tucked half under a whiskey glass. A woman, dark-haired, holding a baby. She looked Italian, early 50s maybe. Maranzano noticed her glance and turned the photo face down. Who was she? Jeanette asked softly. He ignored the question. You need rest. She pressed. You were a medic, weren't you? He hesitated, the first real crack in his armor. Sicily, 1999, civil unrest. I learned to sew up holes faster than I could dig graves. Then you came here. I came where the dying never stop. Jeanette didn't know if he was talking about the city or himself. For a long moment, neither spoke. The sound of the rain against the window was the only thing alive in the room. Finally, she asked, what happens now? Maranzano took a slow breath. Now you rest. Tomorrow we talk. You tell me who tried to kill you. And if I don't. He looked at her, eyes dark, unreadable. Then someone else will try again. And next time, I may not be there. Her body tensed, but she could feel the exhaustion creeping up, thick and heavy. The adrenaline had burned out. The painkillers he'd given her were taking hold. Her vision blurred around the edges. As sleep dragged her under, she heard him say something, half-whispered, meant for his men standing in the doorway. No one touches her. She's mine to deal with. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was Maranzano sitting back down beside her bed, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the rain sliding down the window. Not a monster, not a savior. Something caught in between. You think you know evil when you see it? Think again. Sometimes the monsters wear kindness like a mask, and sometimes mercy hides behind the gun. Don't look away. Don't fall asleep to the lies. Subscribe now, and stay awake to the truth before it finds you first. The morning after the storm, New York felt hungover. Rain pooled in gutters, carrying cigarette butts, fragments of headlines, and the quiet residue of violence the city would never remember. Inside the NYPD's 43rd precinct, every fluorescent light buzzed like an insect caught in a jar. The air was thick with stale coffee and tension. Detective Roy Halpern slammed his phone down. No one's seen her. No calls, no witnesses, nothing. You're telling me a trained officer vanishes after a distress signal, and nobody's got eyes? Sergeant Lee, standing across the table, rubbed his temples. The alley was clean. No body, no blood trail. Don't tell me clean. She bled over the radio. Halpern snapped. Jeanette MacDonald doesn't just disappear. He turned to the evidence bag sitting under a harsh desk lamp. Inside was her badge, scraped and cracked, dried blood along the edge. He stared at it the way you stare at something that knows a secret. Her final transmission echoed in his head. They're not coming. They're already here. Roy's got twisted. Jeanette wasn't just chasing small-time corruption. She'd been digging into the ghost fund, off-the-books cash flow through seized narcotics that always vanished before reaching evidence lockup. Her notes had been thin, coded, careful, but two names appeared too often, Carlo Vitali and Salvatore Maranzano. The Mafia, the police, and a line of dirty money between them. Run everything, Halpern ordered. Traffic cams, squad car GPS, phone records. I don't care if you have to wake up the mayor. Someone in this building sold her out. Across the East River, high above the city, Salvatore Maranzano sat at his mahogany desk with a cigarette burning to ash beside a small glass of grappa. On the desk, under the muted light of morning, lay Jeanette MacDonald's badge. He turned it over in his hand, tracing the cracks with his thumb. Blood had dried in the engraving of her name. He wasn't sure why he'd kept it. Maybe because it was proof that even angels bled. Rocco, his consigliere, entered quietly, a man built like stone, face lined from years of silence. You wanted the ledgers, boss? Maranzano nodded. Put them there. Stacks of files, manila and blackbound, hit the desk. Wire transfers. Shell companies. Cash routes through city departments. Maranzano scanned one column, his jaw tightening. Vitali Holdings, LLC. Transfers marked asset recovery. Legitimate at a glance. Dirty underneath. His voice was calm, but the cigarette trembled faintly between his fingers. Carlo. Rocco hesitated. You think it's him? I don't think, Maranzano said. I know. He leaned back, smoke curling above him. The hit on the cop wasn't from the outside. It came from us. She was getting too close to something he couldn't afford to lose. Rocco's brow furrowed. You want me to handle it? Maranzano shook his head slowly. No. Quiet. Eyes only. Find out who else he's been talking to. I want to see every name he's touched, every badge he's paid. Rocco nodded and left without another word. Alone again, Maranzano looked down at the badge. The irony stung. A cop almost killed by his own investigation, a mob boss uncovering betrayal in his own family. Different uniforms, same rot underneath. He thought of the night before, her breathing shallow, blood hot beneath his hands. He'd seen death before, but not like that. Not someone who still fought to stay alive even when the world wanted her gone. For the first time in years, he felt something dangerous. Conscience. He poured another drink, but didn't touch it. Down the hall, Jeanette woke to the low hum of jazz seeping through the floorboards. She sat up too fast, wincing. Her wound ached, but held. Someone had redressed it while she slept. The room was different in daylight. Not warm, but elegant. Tall windows, heavy drapes, bookshelves lined with leather-bound volumes. And next to the bed, folded neatly, her clean uniform. Her badge was missing. The door opened without a knock. Maranzano entered, black shirt pressed, sleeves rolled up again. No guards this time. Just him. She glared. Where's my badge? He met her eyes. On my desk. You bled on it. I want it back. You'll get it when I decide it's safe for you to leave. She swung her legs off the bed, teeth gritted through pain. You think I'm staying here? You can barely stand, he said calmly. If I wanted you dead, you'd still be in that alley. She froze. Why didn't you leave me there? He took a slow breath. Because you were never supposed to die? Not yet. Something in his tone chilled her. What does that mean? He didn't answer. Instead, he turned to the window, looking out at the skyline like a man staring at the horizon of a battlefield. You were investigating someone, he said. Carlo Vitali. Jeanette's blood ran cold. How do you know that name? Because he works for me. The silence that followed felt like a held breath before an explosion. He's your lieutenant? She said. For now, Maranzano replied. But I suspect he's been doing business with people who don't wear my colors. Or yours. Jeanette stared at him, trying to find the angle. So what now? You interrogate me for intel. His gaze sharpened. No, I let you live. You decide what that means. She didn't know if it was mercy or manipulation. Both, maybe. Her pulse quickened as she said, if I walk out that door, I'll bring the whole department down on this place. He smiled faintly. If you walk out that door, officer, you'll be dead before you reach the corner. Carlo's men think you saw too much. I'm the only thing between you and a closed casket. She wanted to deny it, but the memory of headlights in the rain and the gunfire in that alley said otherwise. He approached her, slow, steady, like a man approaching a wounded animal. You want your badge back? Help me find who ordered your death. Then we're even. Her throat tightened. You're asking me to work with you? No, he said quietly. I'm offering you the chance to stay alive long enough to do your job. Jeanette didn't answer. The city murmured below them. Sirens, horns, the living pulse of corruption neither of them could escape. Finally, she said, You're not a ghost, Maranzano. You're just another criminal with good lighting. He smirked. And you're just another cop who forgot that the badge doesn't make you untouchable. She turned away, but his final words followed her like a warning. We both bleed the same color, officer. Remember that before you decide which side you're on. You think you know who the villains are? You don't. Sometimes the line between justice and corruption is just a flicker of light in the rain. Don't look away from the truth. Subscribe now, because the next betrayal might already be in your blind spot. The rain had stopped by the time they left Manhattan, but the clouds still hung low, heavy and bruised, like the sky hadn't decided whether to forgive or strike again. Maranzano drove in silence, one hand on the wheel, the other resting near the pistol on his thigh. Jeanette sat in the passenger seat, pale but alert, eyes fixed on the cracked windshield. Every mile between them and the city felt like a mile further from anything familiar. No sirens, no city lights, no backup. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Somewhere no one will look," he said. She almost laughed, though it came out hollow. "You mean where cops don't go?" He didn't answer. They turned off the main road and wound through a stretch of overgrown industrial lots. Ahead, an old stone church appeared out of the mist, its steeple leaning, windows boarded, a relic left to rot. "Holy ground," Jeanette muttered. "That's your idea of a safe house." Maranzano parked beside the cracked steps. "It was once, before men like me made God a rumor." He pushed open the heavy doors, and the smell of old wood and candle wax filled the air. Inside, the pews were gone, replaced by crates, lanterns, and dust-covered icons. Faded murals stared down from the walls, saints with missing faces, halos smeared with age. "This place," she said softly. "My family hid here," he said, lighting a lantern. "After the war, when the first blood debts came for us." He didn't elaborate, but the way his voice softened told her enough. Jeanette walked toward the altar, her boots echoing in the hollow space. "So this is where the great Salvatore Maranzano keeps his ghosts." He gave a faint smile. "You talk like a cop again." "I am a cop." "Then tell me something. Officer, what do you call the men who shot you? The ones wearing no badges, driving unmarked cars." She froze. "How do you?" "I saw the wounds," he interrupted. "Entry angles, bullet casings. Standard issue police ammunition. Someone inside your house wanted you erased." Her hands curled into fists. "You're saying my own people. I'm saying corruption doesn't care what color your uniform is." For a long moment, the silence between them felt like a confession neither wanted to make. He set the lantern on the altar and rolled up his sleeves. "You'll stay here until I settle things with Vitali. My men will bring food, supplies, and whatever you need." "And what do you get out of this?" she asked. He turned, meeting her stare head-on. "Truth. Truth. You tell me who sent you after Carlo. I tell you why he wanted you dead." She hesitated, studying him. "That's not an alliance. That's a negotiation. Call it what you want," he said. "In my world, trust starts as a transaction." A noise echoed from the back of the church. Boots, a muffled groan. Jeanette reached instinctively for her gun, forgetting she didn't have it. Maranzano didn't flinch. "Relax. That's Marco." A young man stumbled into view, arm clutched to his chest, shirt soaked in blood. "Boss, they found the warehouse on Fulton. Vitali's men hid it before dawn." "Sit," Maranzano ordered, guiding him onto a bench. Jeanette stepped closer despite herself. "He's bleeding out." "I know," Maranzano said, already tearing a strip from his sleeve. "Bullet grazed the artery. I can keep him breathing." He opened a small metal kit. Gauze, saline, surgical scissors. The precision in his movements was almost unnerving. "Hold pressure," he said to Jeanette. "What?" He looked up. "Unless you want him to die, officer, press here." She hesitated, then knelt, pressing her hand to the wound. The young man gasped but nodded gratefully. Maranzano worked fast, stitching the torn flesh with calm expertise. "You do this often?" she asked quietly. "Once upon a time, every day. In Sicily?" He nodded. "War teaches a man the same thing the streets do. Saving one life doesn't erase the ones you've taken." Jeanette watched his hands, steady, efficient, human. Not the hands of a monster, not entirely. When he finished, he tied off the suture and stepped back. "He'll live." Marco coughed. "Thank you, boss." Maranzano gave a curt nod, then turned to Jeanette. "You learned something today?" "Yeah," she said. "That you don't fit your file." "And you?" he asked. "You don't look like a cop anymore." Her gaze hardened. "Maybe I don't know what that means anymore." He reached into a crate and pulled out a pistol. She tensed as he handed it to her. "Your aim was off when you shot at me last night." She blinked. "You noticed?" He smirked faintly. I notice everything. He placed the gun in her hand and adjusted her stance. Feet shoulder-width apart. Keep your weight forward. Again. She fired once, the shot echoing through the church. The bullet struck the wooden beam near the altar. Too high. He stepped behind her, correcting her grip. His voice low, steady. You're aiming to scare. That's why you miss. Next time, aim to survive. She fired again. The beam splintered dead center. She lowered the gun, breath unsteady. You make it sound so simple. It is. Morality's the hard part. For the first time since waking in his world, she almost smiled. You really think this alliance will work? He didn't smile back. It has to. She holstered the weapon, his weapon, and looked up at the cracked ceiling, where faint light filtered through broken stained glass. How long do we stay here? Until we know who's left, he said. The line lingered. Heavy, certain, prophetic. If you want to live, he added quietly, you stop asking who's right and start asking who's left. Jeanette turned toward him. And if neither of us is left? He met her eyes, unflinching. Then maybe that's justice. Outside, thunder rolled again, distant, hungry. Inside the church, two enemies stood in the flicker of candlelight, hands still smelling of gunpowder and blood, bound not by trust, but by survival. You never truly know who's on your side until the bullets start flying. That's the truth the streets will never tell you until it's too late. If that thought chills you, it should. Subscribe now and never miss the stories that show how loyalty, lies, and survival are never what they seem. The music at La Luna was a lie. Soft jazz floated through the club like cigarette smoke, lazy, beautiful, and utterly false. Beneath the velvet curtains and candlelight, men whispered things that could kill a city. Maranzano sat in his private booth above the main floor, the empire he built glowing beneath him. To anyone else, he looked calm, a man sipping whiskey, watching his domain hum. But his eyes weren't on the crowd. They were on the phone lying silent beside his glass, waiting for a call that would confirm what he already feared. Jeanette stood at the balcony railing behind him, hair tucked under a dark cap, watching the same scene with a cop's suspicion. La Luna was beautiful in a way that made her uneasy, every surface polished, every face pretending not to notice the shadows. This place, she muttered, looks like a cathedral built for sin. Maranzano didn't look up. It's where the saints come to bargain with the devils. She turned to him. You sure your devil's still loyal? He exhaled slowly, the smoke curling from his lips. That's what we're about to find out. An hour earlier, in the basement below the club, Jeanette had hacked through a line of encrypted messages intercepted from one of Maranzano's couriers. She wasn't a hacker, just a cop who'd learned to improvise. The messages were short, coded, but one phrase repeated. La Luna. The hand strikes midnight. Another message was clearer. Transfer confirmed. Agents await payment. Jeanette's heart had dropped when she saw the name on the recipient line. Carlo Vitali. She'd seen it before, in her investigation files. Money laundering, gun routes, offshore accounts, all scrubbed clean through legitimate fronts. Vitali wasn't just Maranzano's right hand. He was his shadow. She'd brought the data upstairs. Your man's selling you out, she'd said, slamming the printed messages on the table. Maranzano had barely reacted, just stared at the pages with the same cold, deliberate patience she'd learned to fear. Now, as La Luna pulsed with false glamour, the two of them waited. The call came just after midnight. Rocco answered first, then handed the phone to Maranzano with a look that said everything. Maranzano listened without a word. When he hung up, his voice was flat. Carlo's at the club. He brought guests. Jeanette frowned. Feds. No, he said, rising. Worse. They descended the staircase together, their footsteps lost in the rhythm of the music. At the far end of the room, Carlo Vitali stood surrounded by his men, slick hair, silver cufflinks, the practiced smile of a man who believed betrayal was an art form. Boss, Carlo said warmly as Maranzano approached. Didn't expect you tonight. You didn't, Maranzano said. You expected me dead. The laughter around the table froze. Carlo's smile faltered, but only for a moment. You've been listening to the wrong people again. Maranzano set the phone on the table between them. The intercepted messages lit up the screen, glowing like evidence in a courtroom. Agents await payment, Maranzano read aloud. You used my name. My accounts. You sold my family to the government for a deal that would buy you immunity. Carlo's mask cracked. It's business, Sal. Survival. You taught me that yourself. I taught you loyalty. Carlo leaned forward, voice dropping to a hiss. Loyalty doesn't buy freedom. Money does. Power does. You're old, Sal. The feds want the new blood, not the ghosts. The men around them shifted uneasily, hands hovering near jackets. Jeanette's pulse raced. The tension was seconds from igniting. Maranzano didn't blink. You planned the ambush on the cop, he said. You knew she was getting close to your accounts. Carlo's gaze flicked to Jeanette, the faintest sneer curling at the corner of his mouth. Collateral damage. You of all people should understand the cost of doing business. Jeanette's hand twitched toward the gun at her hip, but Maranzano stopped her with a glance. You made one mistake, Maranzano said. His voice was quiet, almost gentle. You thought I'd trade honor for peace. Carlo stood. And you made yours, old man. Thinking honor still means anything. In one fluid motion, he pulled a pistol. Jeanette moved at the same time, shoving Maranzano aside as the shot tore through a bottle behind them. Glass exploded. The crowd screamed. Gunfire erupted across the room. Chaos, pure and sudden. Rocco returned fire from the balcony, taking down one of Carlo's men. Maranzano ducked behind the bar, dragging Jeanette with him. Stay down, he barked. Like hell, she snapped, grabbing a fallen guard's weapon and firing back. The air filled with the metallic taste of gunpowder. Music still played, the record skipping, the saxophone turning manic in the crossfire. Carlo fired again, then shouted, You'll burn for this, Sal, before backing toward the rear exit with two surviving gunmen. Carlo, Maranzano shouted, rising amid the chaos. You don't walk away from me. Carlo didn't look back. Watch me. And then he was gone, into the rain-soaked alley, swallowed by the night. The shooting stopped as quickly as it began. The music died. Bodies littered the marble floor, blood mingling with spilled wine. Jeanette leaned against the bar, chest heaving. You could have killed him. Maranzano holstered his weapon. That's not how this ends. You think he'll come back? He poured himself a drink, hands steady again. He won't have to. The feds will. Carlo bought his freedom with my empire. She stepped closer. Then walk away, before this drags you down with him. Maranzano looked at her, really looked, as if trying to decide if she was naive or sincere. Then he said, with the weight of a man who'd buried too many truths, You don't walk away from blood, Jeanette. You drown in it. The words silenced her. Somewhere outside, sirens wailed, distant but closing in. Inside La Luna, the candles flickered out one by one. The jazz stopped for good. Jeanette met his gaze. Then what now? He turned toward the shattered windows, the rain starting again, faint and cold. Now, he said, we find out who's left. You never really know who's loyal, not until the gun's already pointed at your chest. The world isn't divided between good and bad. It's divided between those who pretend and those who survive. If that thought unsettles you, it should. Subscribe now, because the moment you stop watching, someone else starts planning your fall. New York didn't sleep that night. It tore itself awake. By dawn, La Luna was a crime scene. Police barricades glowed under the buzz of halogen lights. Inside, the air reeked of cordite and spilled wine. Bodies were wheeled out under white sheets. And on every morning broadcast, the same headline looped like a curse. Mafia boss Salvatore Maranzano at large, female officer believed abducted. Jeanette MacDonald's badge photo flashed across the screen, framed in blue light. Underneath, in cold text, missing, presumed dead. At the precinct, Detective Roy Halpern watched the footage with clenched fists. This is bull, he muttered. Jeanette didn't just vanish. Someone's making her disappear. Orders came from above, Sergeant Lee said quietly. Feds want Maranzano buried. If she's with him. Roy turned sharply. She's not with him. But even as he said it, doubt crept in. The leaks, the half-truths, the unmarked cars at the scene, it all smelled wrong. Too clean, too deliberate. Somewhere beneath the city, a different story was unfolding. The sound of dripping water echoed through the dark. Maranzano led Jeanette down a narrow tunnel, flashlight beam cutting through decades of grime and graffiti. The air was damp, metallic, filled with the hum of old power lines and distant trains. This used to be part of the original subway expansion, he said. They sealed it off after a collapse in the 60s. Jeanette stumbled, one hand pressed to her side. The wound from La Luna had reopened, blood seeping through the bandage. You shouldn't be moving, he said. Don't tell me what to. Her knees buckled. He caught her before she hit the ground. Stubborn cop. She tried to glare, but her face twisted in pain. Says the crime lord patching up strays in cathedrals. He half smiled. We all have bad habits. He carried her deeper into the tunnel until they reached a rusted maintenance room. For walls, one broken light, and enough quiet to hide a lifetime. He laid her on an old bench and tore open his satchel. Take this, he said, handing her a cloth to bite down on. She looked at the needle and thread in his hand, then back at him. You've got to be kidding me. I don't joke when it comes to bleeding out. He worked quickly. The smell of alcohol and dust mingled in the air. Jeanette tried to hold still, jaw tight, eyes glistening from the pain. Why are you doing this? She whispered. He didn't look up. Because I caused it. She frowned through the haze. You didn't pull the trigger. No, he said quietly. But I made the man who did. She stared at him. The confession came out of him like blood squeezed from a wound. Years ago, he said, tying the final stitch, a man begged me to spare him. He'd stolen money from one of our shipments, small change. I gave the order anyway. Watched it happen. Told myself it was loyalty. Truth is, it was pride. I wanted everyone to know I couldn't be crossed. He sat back, voice flat but hollowed by memory. His boy was there, maybe 10 years old. Looked at me the way you do now, like I was less than human. The tunnel felt smaller then, like the walls were listening. Jeanette swallowed hard. What happened to the kid? He met her gaze. He disappeared. Maybe he's the one pulling the trigger now. Silence. The kind that presses on your chest and refuses to leave. She reached for his wrist, weakly but deliberate. You can't change what you did, but you can still save someone. He looked at her hand, pale, trembling, but steady in intent. For a man who'd lived decades surrounded by killers, that touch hit harder than any bullet. Save who? He asked. Me, she said, eyes half-lidded. Yourself. Her voice broke off as the painkillers took hold. She drifted, breathing shallow but even. Maranzano sat beside her, elbows on his knees, the echo of her words gnawing at the quiet. Save someone. He'd spent his life trading souls for power. Now he was hiding in a tunnel, stitching up a woman who represented everything he once despised. He laughed softly under his breath, no humor in it. You're insane, MacDonald. He adjusted her bandage one last time, then looked at the small cross hanging from the pipe above them. Old, rusted, maybe left by a worker decades ago. He wasn't a man who prayed anymore. But he whispered something anyway, just in case. Above ground, the city churned with chaos. Carlo Vitali had done his work well, fed both sides the same lie. To the Mafia, Maranzano was a traitor who'd sold secrets to the feds. To the cops, he was a murderer who'd taken one of their own. And in between, the ghosts of loyalty and justice began to circle, each waiting for blood to spill first. Maranzano switched off the flashlight and leaned against the wall, listening to the faint heartbeat beside him. Jeanette muttered in her sleep, a single phrase repeating through the fog of fever. They were cops, unmarked, badges scraped off. He froze. What did you say? Her voice was barely a breath. My shooters. They weren't gang. They were ours. It hit him like a verdict. Vitali hadn't just betrayed him. He'd bought the police. The game was bigger than territory now. It was survival. Maranzano exhaled through his teeth, staring into the dark. Blood on both hands, he muttered. Mine and theirs. He checked his gun, then hers, placing them side by side on the bench between them. The old rules were gone. Above them, the sound of a train thundered through the main tunnel, distant, unstoppable. Jeanette stirred again, whispering through the fog. You still think you're the villain? Maranzano looked down at her. No, he said softly. I think I'm just what's left. The rumble of the train faded into silence. In the darkness, two fugitives, one born of law, one of crime, shared the only truth either of them had left. Survival was never clean. You think loyalty protects you? It doesn't. One whisper, one leak, one wrong name. And the people you trust will sell your life for theirs. If that thought chills you, don't ignore it. Subscribe now, because the world's not divided between good and bad anymore. It's divided between who's left and who's next. The rain returned like vengeance. Sheets of it hammered the docks, turning the asphalt into black glass. Cargo cranes stood like rusted skeletons against the lightning, and at the far end of Pier 19, An old warehouse glowed with faint orange light, the kind that only came from fire waiting to happen. Jeanette gripped her pistol tighter as she stepped from the car. Every instinct told her to call Maranzano, to wait, to think. But she'd done enough waiting. She wasn't going to be another damsel in his story or Carlo Vitali's victory. Her burner phone buzzed once. No name, just coordinates. Dock 19, 11:47 p.m. The message she'd been chasing all night. Her breath came in shallow bursts as she crept toward the warehouse. The air smelled of oil, iron, and salt, and something else. Gasoline. She paused. Her wound throbbed under her coat, a dull ache that reminded her she wasn't healed, not even close. But the thought of walking away burned worse. Inside, voices echoed off the steel beams, low male, laughing. Maranzano's finished. Fed'll take the deal soon as they find the girl's body. Jeanette's stomach turned. She inched closer, keeping low behind a stack of barrels. Through the gaps, she saw them, Carlo Vitali and 3 of his men. He looked worse than before, sharp suit, slicked hair, but eyes wild, jittery. Paranoia had replaced arrogance. Carlo lit a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating the madness etched into his grin. "She'll come," he said. "She's too righteous not to." Then he turned, and his gaze locked straight on her. "Like that," he said softly. Before she could move, 2 guns were already up. A flash, a deafening crack. Pain exploded through her shoulder, throwing her against a pillar. "Got her," one of the men yelled. Jeanette hit the ground, the world spinning, the smell of her own blood mixing with gasoline fumes. She crawled behind a crate, vision blurring. Carlo's voice echoed through the vast, empty space. "You should have stayed dead, sweetheart. Would have saved everyone the trouble." He walked toward her, slow and deliberate. "You and Sal, quite the pair. The ghost and the girl who couldn't stay buried." She gritted her teeth and aimed around the corner. "You talk too much." The shot missed. He laughed, a sharp, animal sound. "You're out of your depth, officer. This isn't your city anymore." A faint vibration buzzed in her pocket, her burner phone. She dropped it in the fight, and somewhere, somehow, the screen cracked but still glowed. Tracking active. Maranzano was coming. Outside, a black sedan skidded to a stop by the dock. Maranzano stepped out, rain running off his coat. The wind howled off the harbor, carrying faint echoes of gunfire. He followed the sound without hesitation. He'd traced her signal through the network he'd built to survive, the same tools he once used to hunt rivals. Now, they'd led him to her. He found the door kicked open, the scent of gasoline so thick it made his throat sting. Inside, the light flickered orange-red from the barrels Carlo had rigged to explode. Maranzano moved like a shadow, pistol low, senses honed by decades of violence. "Jeanette." Her reply came weakly from behind a crate. "Over here." He saw her, pale, bleeding, struggling to lift her weapon. His chest tightened at the sight. For a second, he wasn't a kingpin or a killer. He was just a man watching the only good thing left in his life fade. Then Carlo's voice cut through the warehouse. "You always did have a soft spot for lost causes, Sal." Maranzano turned. Carlo stood by the central beam, gun aimed steady, grin cold. "You raised me to be you, and now you hate that I learned." Maranzano's jaw tightened. "I raised you to be loyal." Carlo's laugh echoed. "Loyalty's a fairy tale, old man. You taught me that too." The first shot rang out, then another. Metal screamed as bullets tore through the catwalk. Sparks fell like rain. Jeanette tried to crawl toward cover, but Carlo saw the movement and fired again. The bullet grazed her thigh. She bit back a scream. Maranzano's eyes snapped to her, and something inside him broke. He didn't think. He didn't plan. He just moved. He burst from cover, firing 3 times in quick succession. 2 shots hit Carlo's men. The third missed Carlo by inches. Carlo spun, returning fire, his bullet slicing past Maranzano's shoulder. Gasoline splashed from a ruptured barrel. The fumes thickened. One stray spark. That's all it would take. "Sal, you're done," Carlo shouted, backing toward the rear of the warehouse. "They'll write songs about how the great Maranzano burned. Then let's give them an ending worth singing," Maranzano growled. He stepped into the open. Carlo fired again, and this time, Maranzano didn't dodge. He kept walking forward, each shot hitting closer, but his own aim steady. Bang, bang, bang. The final bullet caught Carlo's center mass. His body slammed against a fuel drum. The the cigarette still burning between his fingers. It fell. The explosion came a heartbeat later, a sound so massive it erased everything. Flame roared through the warehouse, blowing out windows, shattering steel. The shockwave threw Maranzano backward, but he was already moving toward Jeanette, grabbing her as debris rained around them. He dragged her behind a support beam, wrapping his body over hers as the roof came down. Heat seared through his coat. The world turned to fire and smoke. Jeanette coughed, half-conscious. "You're insane." He managed a grim smile. "So they tell me." Another explosion ripped through the far wall. Sirens wailed in the distance. Police, fire, everyone too late. Maranzano lifted her, staggering through the burning wreckage, his own blood mixing with hers. The rain outside hissed against the flames as he carried her out onto the dock. She tried to speak, but he stopped her. "Save your breath. You're not dying here." "Carlo," she whispered. "Gone," he said. "It's over." But she knew better. Nothing in their world was ever over, not completely. By the time the first responders arrived, they found nothing but wreckage, smoke, and one faint trail of footprints leading away from the fire. No sign of Maranzano. Just Jeanette MacDonald, barely alive, clutching a silver cross that wasn't hers. One wrong move. One moment of hesitation. That's all it takes for the world to collapse around you. Fire doesn't warn before it burns, and betrayal doesn't blink before it shoots. Don't wait for your own explosion. Subscribe now, and stay one step ahead of your storms before they consume you. The city moved on, like it always did. The fire at Pier 19 burned through the night, painting the Brooklyn skyline in orange and smoke. By dawn, all that remained was a blackened skeleton of steel and ash. They pulled 17 bodies from the wreckage. Carlo Vitali was one of them. Salvatore Maranzano was not. 3 days later, at NYPD headquarters, the morning mailroom nearly collapsed under the weight of a single envelope. No return address. No fingerprints. Inside, ledgers, photographs, wire transfers, an entire empire laid bare. FBI analysts tore through the contents, cross-referencing account numbers, decoding initials. It was all there. The corruption network linking dirty cops, federal contacts, and the Mafia's upper echelon. Every thread led somewhere powerful, somewhere untouchable. Until now. On the last page of the final ledger, one line stood alone, written in clean, deliberate handwriting. Even the wicked can save the just. There was no signature, no trace of origin, only a faint scent of smoke and sea salt, like the docks still clung to it. Jeanette MacDonald returned to the precinct on crutches, her shoulders still bound, her steps slow but defiant. The chatter stopped as she entered, a mix of relief, curiosity, and something colder, suspicion. To them, she was both survivor and ghost, the cop who vanished with the devil and came back with a story that didn't add up. She ignored their stares. Detective Roy Halpern met her halfway, face drawn but kind. "You shouldn't be here yet. I've been gone long enough." He handed her a folder. "Internal Affairs wants a report. Official version, nothing fancy. They're closing the file on Maranzano." She flipped through the pages, photos of the fire, the charred warehouse, and a list of the dead. Carlo's name was circled. Maranzano's was marked presumed deceased. She didn't correct it. "Any word from the feds?" she asked. Halpern nodded. "Anonymous drop at Quantico. Someone gave them everything. Cops, judges, politicians, all of it. They're calling it the biggest internal purge in a decade." Jeanette stared at the floor, a small, unreadable smile flickering for a moment. "Guess somebody wanted to clean house." Roy studied her. "You really think he's gone?" She closed the folder. "He was dead long before that fire." He hesitated. "You know, if you'd told me 6 months ago that you'd survive a mob ambush and come back to expose half the department, I'd have said you were insane." She slung the strap of her bag over her shoulder, wincing slightly. "Maybe I am." When she turned to leave, he called after her. "Jeanette, who sent the evidence?" She didn't look back. "Someone who owed me nothing." That evening, the precinct was almost empty. Rain tapped softly against the high windows, and the hum of the vending machine was the only sound in the hall. Jeanette sat at her locker, peeling off her jacket, exhaustion settling into her bones. She reached for her badge, the new one they'd issued, and paused. There was an envelope tucked inside the vent at the top of the locker door. No name, just her badge number written in black ink. Her breath caught. She looked around, no one. The hallway was dark, silent. She slid a finger under the flap and opened it. Inside was a single folded note. No money, no threat, no clue. Just 10 words in the same deliberate hand she'd seen on the ledgers. Even the wicked can save the just. SM. Her heart sank and lifted all at once. She stared at it for a long time, her throat tight, memories of the fire flooding back, his body shielding hers, his voice in the chaos. You're not dying here. For the first time in weeks, she let the silence sit beside her like an old friend. Then, without a word, she reached for her lighter. The flame caught quickly, curling the paper into glowing orange edges. The ink vanished first, then the initials, then everything. She watched it burn until it was nothing but black ash in her palm. Not out of hate, not out of guilt, but to protect the last decent thing a damn man ever did. Later, she climbed the narrow staircase to the precinct rooftop. The rain had stopped, leaving the city shining like glass. Below her, traffic pulsed along the avenues, a heartbeat of red and gold. She stood there for a long time, breathing in the smell of wet asphalt and smoke, wondering if somewhere out there, in some forgotten corner of the city, he was still watching. Maranzano, the ghost who saved her, damned himself and vanished without a grave. Her phone buzzed. Halpern again. Press wants a statement. What should I tell them? She typed back. Tell them justice showed up late. But it showed up. She pocketed the phone, staring out at the skyline. Under the gray glow of the streetlights, a black car eased out from an alley across the river. Too far to see the driver, but she didn't need to. The headlights blinked once, a signal. Then the car rolled away into the mist. Jeanette smiled faintly, her voice barely above the wind. Goodbye, Sal. The city swallowed the words, leaving only rain, steam, and the faint echo of sirens somewhere far away. Sometimes the truth burns hotter than fire. One lie, one signature, one name whispered to the wrong ear, and everything you think you know turns to ash. Don't wait for your world to go up in smoke. Subscribe now, because the moment you stop paying attention, someone else rewrites the ending for you. The rain came soft this time. Not the furious storm that once tore through Brooklyn's alleys, but a quiet, misting drizzle that turned the air silver. The city was slower now, gentler somehow, though maybe it was only Jeanette who had changed. She stood at the edge of Pier 19, her hands tucked in the pockets of her long coat, watching the black water fold and ripple against the pilings. The wind carried the smell of diesel, salt, and faint smoke from a tugboat cutting through the fog. Exactly 1 year. To the night. This was where she had died once, and where she'd been brought back by a man who should have let her bleed out. The precinct still called that night the warehouse fire case. The news called it the fall of the Ghost King. But those who'd really lived it, the old detectives, the soldiers who once worked for him, the few who still whispered in bars at closing time, called it something else entirely. They called it Maranzano's mercy. And though nobody said it out loud, everyone knew what that meant. That even the devil might have a heartbeat left if he listens hard enough. Jeanette knelt near the dock's edge. The wood was slick, the rain cold against her skin. She brushed her fingers along the grain until they touched a small indentation. A bullet mark, still visible after all this time. Right here, where he'd pulled her out of the fire once, and then again out of the storm. She exhaled slowly. The sound of the rain filled the silence. On her wrist gleamed a thin silver bracelet, simple, elegant, unmistakably deliberate. One word was engraved across its face. Debts. She didn't know how it got there. It had arrived in a plain box on her doorstep 2 months after the fire. No note, no return address. Just that single word, polished until it caught the light like a whisper. She hadn't taken it off since. A low rumble broke through the drizzle, the purr of an engine. Jeanette turned her head. Through the fog, headlights emerged, soft and gold, cutting twin beams across the water's surface. A black car rolled slowly along the pier, the same make, the same model as the one she remembered from that first night. It stopped 20 yards away. No one stepped out. The door didn't open. The engine stayed running. Jeanette didn't move closer. She didn't need to. She simply stood there, the rain tracing her face, the mist curling between them like a curtain that time refused to lift. For a long moment, it was just two ghosts on opposite sides of the past. Then, faintly, the passenger window lowered halfway. From inside came a voice, low and rough, softened by distance and weather. Hours are paid. Her throat tightened. She didn't answer. The car idled for a second longer, then backed away into the fog, its lights dimming with each turn until it disappeared completely, swallowed by the gray. The silence it left behind was heavy but clean, like something sacred had finally finished. Jeanette let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. It came out shaky, not from fear, but from release. Back in the city, the stories of Salvatore Maranzano had taken on a life of their own. Some said he'd fled to Italy. Others said the fire had left him burned beyond recognition, wandering as a ghost in the backstreets of Naples. A few believed he'd turned himself in under a new name, a phantom living penance somewhere no one would ever look. Jeanette never confirmed or denied any of it. She filed her reports. She kept her silence. She went back to work, training rookies, walking beats, chasing leads. But sometimes, late at night, she would catch a glimpse of a car in her rearview mirror. Black, old, familiar. And for a few seconds, she would smile before it vanished around the corner. Maybe ghosts never leave. Maybe they just learn to move quieter. The rain eased as dawn crept in over the water. The first light touched the skyline, gold against glass and concrete. Jeanette straightened, brushed off her coat, and looked one last time toward the empty pier. He was gone, but so was the monster he used to be. In his place, only the legend remained. The sinner who had saved a cop, and, in doing so, saved something of himself. She whispered to the waves, her voice almost lost in the wind. "Rest easy, Sal. You kept your word." Then she turned and began walking back toward the street, each step carrying her further from the past and deeper into whatever came next. Behind her, the bracelet caught the first flash of sunlight, reflecting across the puddles like a signal. And somewhere, maybe in memory, maybe in truth, the faintest echo followed her down the pier. Even the wicked can save the just. History forgets mercy. It remembers monsters. It's easier to believe the world is black and white, good or evil, law or crime, because it saves us from seeing the truth that terrifies us most. We're all both. Don't let the stories of redemption vanish with the rain. Subscribe now, so you never forget the fragile, dangerous beauty of mercy before it's too late.